Question 1. The primary reason for conducting a life cycle assessment (LCA) is to ensure that the intended application, audience, and reasons for the study are well defined to guide subsequent steps. Mr. Anderson, an LCA practitioner, is tasked with assessing an e-packaging product. He begins the study without clearly defining the goal or the intended audience and includes many unrelated processes in the analysis. Given the circumstances, what is the most critical risk of proceeding without a clearly defined goal and intended application as per ISO 14044, 2006 requirements? A. The LCA results may lack relevance and fail to provide actionable insights for decision-making. B. The study will be biased towards environmental impacts without considering economic factors. C. The data collection process will automatically become simpler and less costly. D. The functional unit becomes irrelevant and can be omitted from the study. Answer. Correct answer, explanation. According to ISO 14044, 2006, clearly defining the goal, including intended application, audience, and reasons, is foundational to an LCA. Without this clarity, the scope can be poorly set, leading to irrelevant data collection, inclusion of unnecessary processes, and ultimately results that do not support decision-making effectively. ISO 14044, Section. Point 1. Option B is incorrect because economic factors are generally outside of the environmental scope unless included explicitly. Option C is false as unclear goals typically complicate data collection. Option D is incorrect as the functional unit must always be defined to provide reference for comparison. ISO 14044, Section 4.2. Question 2. When faced with the task of establishing system boundaries, Isa Patel is evaluating whether to include the transportation of raw materials in her product systems LCA. She has to decide based on exclusion criteria described in ISO 14044, 2006. Which of the following criteria would best justify the exclusion of transportation processes from the system boundary? A. The transportation contributes less than 1% to the total environmental impact based on preliminary screening. B. The transportation data is unavailable and therefore must be excluded. C. The transportation occurs outside the geographic scope of the study regardless of its impact. D. The transportation cost exceeds the project budget, so it must be omitted. Answer. Correct answer, explanation. ISO 14044 requires system boundaries to include all relevant processes, but allows exclusion of processes with negligible influence, typically when their contribution is below the threshold, often 1% and justified transparently. Section 4.3.4. Option B is not justified because data gaps should be handled through estimation, not exclusion. Option C ignores the importance of environmental relevance regardless of location. Option D is incorrect because budget constraints do not justify exclusions that compromise data completeness or relevance. Question 3. Based on the information provided, Istalin is conducting an LCA with multiple co-products. He applies economic allocation based on market prices to distribute environmental loads among co-products. However, some co-products have volatile market prices. According to ISO 14044, 2006, what should Istalin consider to ensure his allocation procedure remains consistent and scientifically valid? A. Use physical allocation, e.g., mass or energy content instead of economic allocation where price volatility affects reliability. B. Always select economic allocation regardless of market conditions to maintain consistency. C. Exclude core products with volatile prices to avoid complexity in allocation. D. Allocate all environmental loads to the primary product only. Answer. Correct answer, A. Explanation. ISO 14044 emphasizes selecting allocation procedures based on underlying physical relationships and scientific justification. Economic allocation is allowed but should be used cautiously if price volatility affects data reliability. Section 4.3.4. Physical allocation methods, such as mass or energy content, are often more stable. Option B ignores the impact of volatility. Option C violates completeness principles, and Option D is generally not allowed unless justified, so all core products share environmental burdens. Question 4. In light of recent developments, Dr. Martinez is tasked with communicating comparative assertions based on an LCA study of two competing products. E plans to publicly disclose the results without conducting a critical review. According to ISO 14044, 2006, what should Dr. Martinez do before making such public claims? A. Ensure that the study has undergone an external critical review to verify methodological consistency and data quality. B. Publish the results immediately to promote transparency. C. Limit the disclosure to internal stakeholders to avoid liability. D. Exclude uncertainty and limitations from the report to avoid confusion. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 mandates that any comparative assertions intended for public disclosure must be critically reviewed by an external panel to ensure the study's transparency, methodological robustness, and reproducibility. Section 5.5. This process protects stakeholders from misleading claims. Option B is non-compliant and risky. Option C contradicts the intent of public disclosure, and Option D violates transparency requirements. Question 5. Taking into account data quality requirements, Lee is collecting secondary data for a product system's lifecycle inventory. She must ensure that data relevance, accuracy, completeness, and consistency meet ISO 14044 standards. Which of the following best describes critical step to verify data quality? A. Perform sensitivity analysis to determine the impact of data variability on overall LCA results. B. Assume all secondary data are valid if sourced from reputable databases. C. Use only primary data collected on site, disregarding secondary data entirely. D. Include all available data regardless of source to maximize completeness. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 stresses that data quality parameters must be assessed, and sensitivity analysis is a key technique to evaluate how data uncertainties affect final LCA results. Section 442. Assuming validity without verification. Option B. Risks poor quality. Exclusively using primary data. Option C is not always feasible, including all data without quality. Option D. Can introduce inconsistencies. Question 6. Given the circumstances, Choi must perform mass and energy balances in his product system modeling to ensure data integrity. He notices some discrepancies between inputs and outputs in the inventory data. According to ISO 14044, 2006, what is the best practice for addressing these discrepancies? A. Iteratively refine data inputs and processes until mass and energy balances are closed within acceptable error margins. B. Disregard discrepancies if they are small and continue the study. C. Just outputs arbitrarily to match inputs without documenting changes. D. Omit the processes causing discrepancies from the system boundary. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 requires that mass and energy balances be performed and discrepancies minimized by iterative refinement of data and system modeling. Section 441. Disregarding or arbitrarily adjusting data. Options B and C violates principles of transparency and reproducibility. Omitting processes. Option D reduces completeness and may bias results. Question 7. Among the various LCA methodologies, Gomez is deciding whether to apply CML or recipe for impact assessment. She wants to understand which approach better integrates midpoint and endpoint impact categories for a comprehensive environmental profile. Based on ISO 14044 guidance, which statement accurately reflects the difference between these two methods? A. Recipe provides both midpoint and endpoint results, allowing a broader interpretation of impacts compared to CML, which primarily focuses on midpoint indicators. B. CML includes social impact categories, while recipe focuses only on environmental indicators. C. Both CML and recipe disregard normalization and weighting as optional and do not provide endpoint results. D. Recipe excludes human toxic impacts, which CML incorporates. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. According to ISO 14044 and associated LCA methodological guidelines, CML primarily uses midpoint categories environmental mechanisms, while recipe offers both midpoint and endpoint indicators, enabling a broader understanding of potential environmental damage. Recipe methodology documents ISO 14044 4, Section 4.5. Option B is false as neither focus on social impacts. Option C incorrectly states both exclude endpoints. Option D is wrong since both include human toxicity. Question 8. Considering the evidence, Mr. Gupta is conducting sensitivity analysis to determine how allocation choices influence his LCA results for a multifunctional process. He finds that switching from mass-based to economic allocation causes a significant shift in impact distribution. What should Mr. Gupta conclude according to ISO 14044 principles? A. Allocation choices can significantly influence results. The transparent documentation and justification of chosen allocation methods are essential. B. Allocation method selection is arbitrary and can be changed at any time without explanation. C. Economic allocation is always preferred as it reflects market realities. D. If allocation method changes results drastically, the study should be abandoned. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 requires that allocation methods be carefully selected, justified and transparently documented because they affect results. Section 4.3.4. Sensitivity analysis helps reveal such impacts. Option B is contrary to scientific rigor. Option C overgeneralizes and ignores context-specific suitability. Option D is unnecessarily drastic. Question 9. Throughout the course of preparing the LCA report is new and must ensure it meets ISO 14044 transparency and comprehensiveness requirements. Which of the following elements is not mandatory to include in the report? A. Description of the critical review process, including reviewer qualifications if applicable. B. Detailed financial analysis of the product system's market competitiveness. C. Clear statement of goal and scope, including functional unit and system boundaries. D. Documentation of data sources, assumptions, and limitations. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. ISO 14044 requires LCA reports to clearly present goal and scope, system boundaries, data sources, assumptions, limitations, and critical review outcomes if applicable. Section 5.4. Financial analyses are outside the scope of environmental LCA reporting. Options A, C, and D are mandatory components. Question 10. The underlying principle of the critical review process in ISO 14044 is to ensure that the LCA study is scientifically and technically valid. Mr. Ibrahim is planning an internal review only for a comparative assertion intended for public release. What potential issue might arise according to ISO 14044? A. Internal reviews alone are insufficient for public comparative assertions, risking credibility and acceptance issues. B. Internal reviews are preferred over external reviews to maintain confidentiality. C. Internal reviews guarantee full compliance with ISO 14044. D. No review is needed if the LCA practitioner is experienced. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 5.5 states that comparative assertions made public require an external critical review to assure impartiality, scientific validity, and stakeholder confidence. Internal review alone does not meet this requirement. Options B, C, and D ignore this fundamental compliance and transparency principle. Question 11. In an effort to develop a data collection plan for an LCA of an electronic device, Rivera must decide whether to prioritize primary data collection or use secondary data sources. Given that primary data is more accurate but time-consuming and costly, which approach best aligns with ISO 14044, 2006 guidelines to balance data quality and resource constraints? Exclusively use primary data to ensure the highest data quality regardless of costs. B. Use secondary data initially and supplement with primary data where it critically affects results. C. Rely only on secondary data from generic databases to save time. D. Avoid data quality checks if data sources are industry recognized. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. ISO 14044 recommends that data collection plans balance accuracy, completeness, and resource constraints. Section 4.4. Using secondary data is acceptable when primary data is unavailable or costly, but critical processes should have primary data for reliability. Option A may be impractical. Option C risks poor accuracy, and option D violates data quality principles. Question 12. By evaluating the inclusion of recycling processes within the system boundaries of a product's life cycle, ISTA Smith encounters multiple allocation challenges for environmental burdens shared between recycled and virgin materials. According to ISO 14044, which allocation method is preferred to avoid arbitrary burden assignment? A. Cut-off approach, where burdens up to the recycling process are assigned to the previous system. B. Economic allocation based on material market values. C. System expansion to model avoided production of virgin materials. D. Allocation by mass ratio between recycled and virgin inputs. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.3.4 recommends system expansion for multifunctional processes like recycling, as it avoids allocation by including the environmental credit of avoided virgin material production, providing more comprehensive results. Cut-off A is allowed but less preferable. Economic and mass allocation, B and D, are valid but can be arbitrary or less accurate. Question 13. To determine whether a comparative assertion between two construction materials can be publicly disclosed, Chen must understand the role of the critical review. If the assertion is to be used externally, what is the minimum review requirement as per ISO 14044? A. An internal review by the LCA team is sufficient if documented. B. A panel of independent external reviewers must conduct the review. C. No review is necessary if both products have similar environmental profiles. D. A peer-reviewed publication replaces the need for an external review. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. For public comparative assertions, ISO 14044 Section 5.5 mandates an external critical review by a panel independent of the study team to ensure credibility and transparency. Internal review alone, A, is insufficient. The similarity of products, C, does not waive review, and peer-reviewed publication, D, does not substitute the specific review requirements. Question 14. With respect to classification in LCA, ISTA Ivanov assigns raw inventory flows to environmental impact categories. However, he is unsure about the appropriate category for particulate matter emissions. According to ISO 14044 guidance, which impact category best fits particulate matter? A. Ozone depletion potential. B. Human toxicity potential. C. Acidification potential. D. Photochemical ozone creation potential. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Particulate matter primarily affects human health and is categorized under human toxicity potential in LCA frameworks ISO 14044 Section 4.5.2. Ozone depletion A relates to specific halogenated substances. Acidification C relates to sulfur and nitrogen oxides. Photochemical ozone creation D relates to smog-forming precursors. Question 15. During the process of performing normalization in LC, Alkarim must decide on the appropriate reference data set. Why is normalization considered an optional step, and what value does it add when performed correctly? A. It is mandatory to compare results between products of different functions. B. It expresses impact indicators relative to a reference, helping stakeholders interpret the magnitude of impacts. C. It replaces the need for characterization factors. D. It always changes the ranking of alternatives, ensuring a definitive choice. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.5.4 states normalization is optional but useful to place impact results in context relative to a reference, aiding interpretation. It does not replace characterization. C. Nor is it mandatory for functional comparisons. A. Normalization may or may not change rankings. D. Question 16. Given the circumstances, ISTA Fernandez faces a data gap for a key emission factor in his LCA. Which of the following methods is recommended by ISO 14044 for addressing data gaps and minimizing uncertainty? A. Estimating the missing data using proxies or similar processes with justification. B. Excluding the process entirely due to lack of data. C. Assuming zero emissions to avoid overestimating impacts. D. Using outdated data without validation to fill the gap. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 442 encourages transparent, justified estimation for data gaps using proxy data or interpolation to maintain completeness, excluding processes B or assuming zero, C violate completeness, using outdated data without validation, D risks inaccuracies. Question 17. Within the framework of reporting requirements, Wilson is preparing her final LCA report. Which of the following best describes the importance of documenting assumptions and limitations explicitly in the report? A. It ensures transparency and allows reviewers and stakeholders to understand the study's boundaries and uncertainties. B. It is optional if the study scope is simple. C. It is discouraged to prevent criticism of the study. D. It should be kept confidential to protect intellectual property. Answer. Correct answer and explanation. ISO 14044 Section 5.4 emphasizes transparency through documenting assumptions and limitations to allow proper interpretation and critical review. Options B, C, and D contradict this principle, risking misunderstandings or lack of credibility. Question 18. From the perspective of sensitivity analysis, Mr. Kumar tests how changes in the functional unit affect LCA results for a reusable water bottle. He finds significant shifts in impact rankings when the functional unit changes from 1 bottle to 1 liter of water delivered. What does this imply about defining the functional unit in LCA? A. The functional unit critically influences comparability and must align with the study's goal and function of the system. B. Functional units are arbitrary and chosen for convenience only. C. The functional unit should always be defined as single product item. D. Sensitivity analysis is not needed for the functional unit selection. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.2 states the functional unit is the quantified function of the product system serving as a basis for comparison. Its definition strongly influences results and comparability. Options B and C are incorrect as functional unit must reflect function, and D disregards essential sensitivity evaluation. Question 19. The core principles of performing a consistency check include verifying the uniform application of methods and data throughout an LCA study. Zhao finds that different data sources use inconsistent system boundaries for similar processes. According to ISO 14044, what is the most appropriate corrective action? A. Harmonize system boundaries across data sources or adjust data accordingly to maintain consistency. B. Use the data as is to preserve source integrity. C. Exclude inconsistent data sources to simplify the study. D. Modify the goal to match the inconsistencies. Answer. Correct answer and explanation. ISO 14044 Section 443 requires consistency in system boundaries, assumptions, and methods to ensure comparability and validity. Harmonizing or adjusting data is best practice. Using inconsistent data, B, or excluding sources, C, can compromise completeness or bias. Modifying goal, D, after data collection is inappropriate. Question 20. For many years, Mr. Novak has observed that LCA studies sometimes lack clarity in formulating recommendations based on results. According to ISO 14044, what is the best approach when formulating recommendations from LCA results? A. Recommendations should be clearly linked to identified significant environmental issues supported by robust data interpretation and limitations. B. Recommendations should prioritize cost savings over environmental impacts. C. Recommendations can ignore uncertainty if results seem consistent. D. Recommendations should only be made by external reviewers. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.6 requires that recommendations derive logically from hotspot analysis and interpretation, considering data quality, limitations, and uncertainty. Options B and C neglect environmental focus and uncertainty management. Option D is incorrect. Recommendations are the study team's responsibility, though reviewers may provide input. Question 21. From a practical standpoint, Taylor is developing a life cycle inventory LCI model and must decide how to represent intermediate flows between unit processes she encounters. A situation where a byproduct from one process serves as an input to another process outside a defined system boundary. According to ISO 14044, what is the appropriate way to handle this intermediate flow? A. Treat it as a cutoff and exclude it from the inventory to simplify the model. B. Include the intermediate flow and expand the system boundary to incorporate downstream processes. C. Convert the intermediate flow into a waste stream with no further consideration. D. Allocate the environmental burdens solely to the initial process, producing the byproduct. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. ISO 14044, Section 4.3 encourages modeling product systems comprehensively by including intermediate flows and expanding system boundaries as needed to capture relevant environmental exchanges. Excluding intermediate flows, A, or treating them as waste, C, can lead to incomplete results. Option D ignores multifunctionality and system interactions. Question 22. In a modern context of addressing uncertainty, Mr. Walker uses Monte Carlo simulation to propagate data uncertainty in his LCA study. How does this method align with ISO 14044 guidelines for managing uncertainty in LCA? A. It quantitatively assesses variability and provides probabilistic distributions of results, improving transparency. B. It eliminates uncertainty by refining data inputs. C. It is discouraged because it complicates interpretation of results. D. It replaces the need for sensitivity analysis. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. ISO 14044, Section 4.4.2 supports quantitative uncertainty analysis methods like Monte Carlo simulation to assess variability and provide probability distributions, enhancing understanding of result robustness. Option B is incorrect because uncertainty cannot be eliminated. Option C misunderstands the method's value, and option D is wrong as sensitivity and uncertainty analyses complement each other. Question 23. Upon closer examination, Octopark identifies inconsistencies between the defined functional unit and the chosen allocation procedure in a multifunctional process involving energy cogeneration. According to ISO 14044, what is the best course of action to ensure methodological coherence? A. Revisit and possibly redefine the functional unit to align with the allocation basis and study goal. B. Ignore the inconsistency if the final results seem reasonable. C. Change the allocation method to mass-based without further analysis. D. Exclude the core products to avoid allocation complexity. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. ISO 14044, sections 4.2 and 4.3.4 stresses the alignment of the functional unit allocation procedure and study goal to ensure methodological consistency, ignoring inconsistencies. B. Arbitrarily changing methods. C. Or excluding co-products. D. Jeopardize study validity and transparency. Question 24. Considering the evidence, Evans is preparing an LCA report that includes weighting of impact categories. Which statement best reflects ISO 14044's position on weighting? A. Weighting is an optional step that applies subjective value judgments and must be transparently documented. B. Weighting is mandatory and replaces the need for characterization. C. Weighting should be performed only by the external reviewers. D. Weighting is prohibited due to potential bias. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. ISO 14044, section 4.5.4 regards weighting as optional, recognizing its subjective nature. When used, it must be clearly documented and justified. It does not replace characterization. B. Is not exclusively for reviewers. C. Nor is it outright prohibited. D. Question 25. The growing trend in utilizing external reviewers for critical review processes has highlighted some key qualifications. Which of the following is not considered? A necessary qualification for a critical reviewer under ISO 14044. A. Independence from the study team. B. Expertise in LCA methodology and relevant technical areas. C. Prior involvement in the same LCA study. D. Ability to objectively assess data quality and assumptions. Answer. Correct answer: C. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 5.5 mandates critical reviewers be independent and qualified with relevant expertise and objectivity. Prior involvement in the same study C. compromises independence and is therefore inappropriate. Options A, B, and D are essential qualifications. Question 26. When analyzing the implications of setting a functional unit as 1 kilogram of product for process with variable product quality, Ista Lopez notices significant impact differences due to functional variability. According to ISO 14044 principles, what should Ista Lopez do? A. Define the functional unit based on the product's function rather than simply weight to reflect quality differences. B. Use 1 kilogram regardless of quality variations to maintain consistency. C. Exclude quality considerations from the LCA to avoid complexity. D. Normalize all products to the lowest quality level. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.2 requires the functional unit to represent the quantified function delivered, which includes quality aspects, using mass alone. B. Or ignoring quality. C. Can misrepresent results, normalizing to the lowest quality. D. Is arbitrary and unscientific. Question 27. Throughout the course of the interpretation phase, Johnson is tasked with identifying significant environmental issues, hotspots, in her LCA. Which approach aligns best with ISO 14044 to identify these hotspots? A. Analyze life cycle inventory and impact results to find processes or inputs contributing most to total impacts. B. Select hotspots based on economic importance only. C. Identify hotspots by excluding minor processes arbitrarily. D. Base hotspots solely on stakeholder opinions without data support. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.6 defines hotspot analysis as identifying life cycle stage processes with major environmental impacts based on data and interpretation. Economic factors, B, or opinions alone, D, are insufficient. Arbitrary, exclusion, C, lack scientific basis. Question 20. Across different scenarios, Mr. Ahmed must decide whether to include land use change Luke in his LCA. A biofuel product, given the potential variability and complexity. What does ISO 14044 suggest regarding inclusion of Luke? A. Include Luke if it is significant and data are available, documenting assumptions and uncertainties. B. Always exclude Luke to simplify the study. C. Include Luke only if it is beneficial to the product's environmental profile. D. Ignore Luke as it falls outside product system boundaries by default. Answer. Correct answer 8. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 4.3.4 requires including significant processes and flows, such as Luke, if they affect environmental outcomes and sufficient data exist. Assumptions and uncertainties must be documented. Exclusion B, D, or selective inclusion C violates completeness and transparency. Question 29. In response to critical review findings, Mr. Schmidt must update his LCA study. Which principle best guides how he should incorporate reviewer feedback according to ISO 14044? A. Address all substantive comments and revise the study or justify why certain comments were not incorporated. Only accept feedback that aligns with the original study goal. C. Ignore minor comments as they do not affect study validity. D. Disclose reviewer identities to justify ignoring critical feedback. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044 Section 5.5 requires transparent handling of critical review comments, including revisions or justification for exclusions, ensuring credibility and transparency. Options B, C, and D undermine this process. Question 30. The interrelationship between data quality and completeness is crucial in LCA. Davis notices that improving data completeness sometimes lowers overall data quality due to using less reliable sources. According to ISO 14044, how should she balance this trade-off? A. Aim for a balance by documenting data quality and completeness, prioritizing relevance and accuracy for critical data. B. Maximize completeness regardless of data quality. C. Maximize data quality by excluding uncertain or incomplete data. D. Avoid documenting data quality if completeness is high. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. ISO 14044, Section 4.4.2 emphasizes balancing data quality and completeness with transparency. Prioritizing critical data quality while documenting all aspects enables informed interpretation. Options B and C favor extremes, and D contradicts transparency requirements.